Joining us from Tel Aviv, Dan Perry, who's an international affairs expert. Dan, a pleasure to have you back on the broadcast. Thanks for joining us once again to discuss this breaking news. Now, Dan, what does it tell you about how these negotiations are progressing if the Iranians are willing to give up their main point of leverage over this conflict? The Strait of Hormuz is now being reopened.
Well, it isn't permanent. They're willing to do it during the negotiation. And it tells me that the Iranians want to calibrate and keep the door open to a resolution. Ultimately, the bigger question is the U.S. willing to come to an arrangement, some manner of a compromise with the Iranians that leaves the regime in power? And we have to remember that the current regime is not exactly the regime that existed in the status quo antebellum, which was a pure theocracy. My sense is that the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, have more or less carried out an internal coup, and Revolutionary Guard is currently in charge. Revolutionary Guard is a total mafia, and they have economic interests. They control a quarter to a third of Iran's economy, and they have a pretty good, degree of control over the well-being of the global economy. The Europeans, you asked about them before, they get about 15 to 20% actually of the oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz from the Persian Gulf, and that constitutes for them about a sixth to a fifth of their energy incoming. So it's not overwhelming, but it is relevant. And what really is the case is that if that should be shut off or made difficult, then you'll have downstream consequences in the world economy, and the world will suffer. Now, to what degree the world is prepared to allow a mafia to control Iran, country of 100 million people, and to, let's not forget, when protests rise, massacre tens of thousands of their own people, is an open question. My guess is the world is willing to do that. And we can discuss, morally speaking, if that's good or bad, and the complex nature of interfering in other countries when they're repressive. But my guess is, if the remnants of the Iranian regime are willing to be semi-reasonable, there's a deal to be done. And to your original question, that is why there are signals now that everyone's being a little bit reasonable. And, the Iranians themselves are speaking of the opening of the strait until further notice.
This statement by Donald Trump, he's saying that Iran and the United States are removing these sea mines. What do you make about this statement, this latest statement coming from US President Donald Trump? Could they be working in conjunction on this issue? Could these sea mines really be removed? Of course, the main leverage that Iran has with the Strait of Hormuz is the fact that they have these sea mines, or the threat of these sea mines there for commercial shipping passing through. So if indeed that these sea mines are being removed, and this is done in cooperation, it signals very positive developments about the relationship between the US and Iran at this time regarding the Strait of Hormuz. What's your take on this latest statement on social media from Trump?
Beyond that, there is always a fog of war, and one should be very cautious about assessing any statements made by the belligerents. On top of that, just as David said, Trump is an inveterate liar. I don't put almost any stock in anything he says, ever. Definitely during a situation where even a non-professional liar would probably be dissembling. So I think we have to be very cautious in how we judge the public statements. However, you can zoom out a little bit and look at the reality. The reality is that Trump probably wants an exit rank from this war. And the reality also probably is that the remnants of the regime in Iran, even though they're going to pretend very hard to the contrary, probably also do as well. Because if the war ends right now, they get to keep their plunder. Because as we all agree, they're a mafia. So when there's a potential win-win on the table, one can assess that any moves made to lower the flames might be genuine. And I think that's where I come down on this. And I have to underscore, it is in no way because of anything Trump says in public. If Trump said today that this is Friday, I think the chances are less than 1 in 7.
To both my guests, stay with us now. We're moving to some further statements from the US President Donald Trump. He's said that the United States had prohibited Israel from bombing Lebanon following a ceasefire deal, adding that Washington would work with Lebanon to deal with Hezbollah. Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They are prohibited from doing so by the USA. Enough is enough, Trump has said on his Truth Social network, a day after announcing the 10-day truce. Trump also said any deal the United States reaches with Iran is in no way subject to Lebanon, but the US will deal with the Hezbollah situation in an appropriate manner. The US president also said the US will get nuclear material from Iran. Trump's posts came after Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that for passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of this ceasefire. Now, I want to go back to you, Dan, with this story. Trump's saying that he's prohibited Israel from bombing Lebanon. Does this indicate to you that the United States is indeed the one who's calling the shots in this scenario, or has the United States been acting under pressure from Iran? Who has the strategic advantage right now in this moment in time in the war?
Look, whatever causes Trump to decide anything could or could not be, related to whatever advantage you may imagine Iran has. But if Trump decides that Israel should end its war in Lebanon, then I fear that there's not too much that Israel could do, because Israel cannot possibly, in the current situation, continue without a green light from the U.S. That's just the reality. They will lack spare parts for their airplanes. And I don't want to make Israel sound like a vassal state or to in any way disrespect Israel. The military capabilities and the intelligence wherewithal that the Israelis have displayed in this war and over the past 2 years, they are, my friends, nothing short of spectacular. However, in the current environment, given Netanyahu's total political dependence on Trump, if Trump says you end the war in Lebanon, Israel has to end the war in Lebanon, and the rest is just words and spin and propaganda.
Mm-hmm. David, what's your take? How do you assess this relationship between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump? Who do you think is calling the shots right now?
Well, Dan is exactly right, that because the Israeli military, as professional and skilled as it is, depends on the U.S. for things like replacement parts, weapons, replacement munitions, very sophisticated munitions, they're subject to leverage by Trump.
There really is an Iranian advantage, and there's a great danger for everyone else that the Iranians should be seen as having somehow been instrumental in ending the war in Lebanon, or at least bringing a ceasefire in Lebanon, because reasonable people want to detach the two. There's no upside to Iran being given credit for an end to the situation in Lebanon, and yet, just as David said, that is what is emerging because of the sequence of events. So now the Iranians are going to claim that they somehow helped Lebanon, and that is very, very bad, because nothing good will come in Lebanon if Iran is seen as its protector. Lebanon needs to align with the West. Lebanon needs to make peace with Israel and Syria. Lebanon needs to be independent of Iran, and Lebanon definitely needs to get rid of the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. And yet, the framing that you're alluding to right now on this show is helpful to Iran in the Lebanese sphere, and that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Keep that note, please, Dan. We're now moving to Lebanon. Hezbollah's parliamentary bloc has reiterated its firm stance on what it calls the option of resistance. against Israeli actions across Lebanon, signalling that its position remains unchanged despite ongoing diplomatic activity and ceasefire arrangements in the region. The bloc said it continues to view resistance as a central response to what it describes as Israeli aggression. It also criticised the Lebanese government for entering direct discussions with Israel, warning that such steps have pushed the country into what it called an extremely dangerous phase. The statement reflects deep internal divisions within Lebanon over how to engage with Israel amid shifting regional dynamics. On the ceasefire framework, the bloc said any agreement must include a complete halt to Israeli military operations, along with restrictions on Israeli freedom of movement inside Lebanese territory. It argued that partial measures would not be sufficient to ensure stability or lasting calm. At the same time, Hezbollah's parliamentary bloc said it maintains a cautious commitment to the ceasefire understanding, but stressed that it must be comprehensive and enforceable to be considered viable. Now, we're joined again by Dan Perry. Dan, just touching on what you were mentioning there about the situation in Lebanon right now, there's been some very firm rhetoric coming from Hezbollah, of course. Do you see a scenario ahead where Lebanon and Israel could be working together to remove these military capabilities of Hezbollah to really change the situation in Lebanon in the future?
The idea that Hezbollah exists to protect Lebanon, to somehow guard its borders from Israel, is a farce. Hezbollah is there as a forward militia of Iran to cause trouble and to attack Israel and embroil Lebanon in wars with Israel that Lebanon did not choose. No country in the world would want to have a militia like Hezbollah operating as a state within a state and embroiling it in wars that the state has not decided to involve itself with. No one would accept that. Not Egypt, not France, not Canada, not the US. The whole idea is ridiculous. Now Lebanon, finally, even though its army is probably weaker than Hezbollah, now has a government that says openly that they wish to disarm Hezbollah. They need help. In this regard, they are aligned with Israel. Israel has no territorial ambitions on Lebanon. The entire Israeli action in Lebanon is because of the threat from Hezbollah. So I would hope that if there is an upcoming meeting between Joseph Aoun and Benjamin Netanyahu, they're practical, they're open, they're transparent, and they probably need to try to bring in a larger global consensus. And that can include the Arab League and various Arab militaries, and maybe European militaries and others. It's complex because the idea of foreign intervention in countries is rarely successful and generally bad. But Lebanon clearly wants to get rid of Hezbollah. They're unable to. The idea that Israel will do it is somewhat toxic to the Lebanese. Yet Israel is the interested party because Lebanon is attacking it. And I think Lebanon needs help. My basic advice to the government of Lebanon is openly ask for help from whoever is willing to give it. And my guess is it could be some combination of an Arab force and a NATO-related force, European force. The world is not looking for another Middle Eastern quagmire, but this is a problem that cannot be solved by Lebanon alone.
Dan, thanks very much for your analysis. It's always a pleasure to have you on the Bulletin.